The world is filled with hypocrites who like to spend their time judging other people who they think are hypocrites. See, the general idea of a hypocrite is somebody who says that they stand for something, but if you really examine them closely, you'll see that it's all a bit of a lie, because they don't really stand for the principle that they're putting a billboard out there saying that they do. People will be abusive, and then they'll point at other people who are perhaps abusive in a different way, and they'll call out the evil of that other person. Maybe men will say that women are manipulative, and women will say that men are controlling, because that's respectively the most common form of hypocrisy that each of the two genders will manifest. Men who aren't the best of men will tend to be controlling, and women who are not the best of character will tend to be manipulative. And of course that does not represent all men or all women, but by and large that trend tends to be the case, because women will want to be sexually attractive and the center of attention, and they try to use that to get what they want. Men try to be macho and strong and alpha, if you will, and then they use that to try to bully other people into giving them what they want. And neither of those are good things. They're just two different things. But there's a lot of times where you might have a man who's controlling point out the manipulative tendencies of a toxic woman, and a toxic woman would point out the manipulative tendencies of a man who abuses power, and both of them are oblivious to the fact that they actually each have their own pet demon. Something very bad about their personal character. It's just different. And because it's different, they just point out the bad in somebody else and they don't look in the mirror. And we could look at other things. We could look at, for example, the divide between the conservative right and the liberal left. And you have people on one hand who will rage against the problems of, if you will, woke culture, and then be really indignant about liberals who want to force their sense of enlightenment and progressivism on everyone else. And then those same people might be quite willing to go after anyone who doesn't believe in their particular political views or their religious doctrines. Or you might have liberals who are super comfortable pointing out the ignorance and evil of religion or of traditional teachings, fundamentalism, if you will. But then they're completely oblivious to the fact that if you really look in the mirror, you'll see that a lot of the liberal attitudes of today are very much identical to the religious dogmas that are out and about in the world. It's just two different brands of the same folly of wanting to play God and dictate to other people what they should and shouldn't do, what they should and shouldn't believe, and then take a moral high ground by saying, you know, look at me, I've kind of mastered something here, and everyone else who doesn't see it the way I do is a fool. And you know, I think we really have a lot of that surrounding us everywhere. And the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The truth is not that there's one particular point of view that's 100% accurate, and then all the other ones are totally wrong. The truth is that they're all a little bit right, but not completely right. And that leads me to the issue of what I like to call bundling. Bundling, when you take one valid point and then you tie it on to another less valid point, and you imply that the two are basically part of the same bucket. So, for example, let's say that we talk about human rights and we say, okay, well, do we think that slavery is wrong? And then, of course, we reach the conclusion slavery is wrong. We agree on this. And then we say, okay, well, we agree slavery is wrong, so therefore, obviously, we should agree that women ought to have the right to vote. All right, so maybe we're still kind of talking about human rights. Now, admittedly, slavery is different than women's suffrage. One is locking somebody else up in and putting them in chains, and the other is denying them a public right, not their personal freedom. So one is related to civics, and the other one is related more to something very personal, as in, you know, whether you're able to have free agency. So while they're both in the same ballpark, they're not the same topic. Now, we see today, we see more talk about things like racial equity, you know, the idea that maybe everyone should ultimately end up in the same place with the same level of success and the same level of appreciation and acceptance in society. And now we're not talking about anything to do with rights at all. We're talking about whether you wind up feeling like society accepts you, whether you subjectively have a time that's easy for you to find success, whether essentially there's a path forward that gives you the level of ease that other people have. And that's very subjective, because now we're not talking about rights awarded to someone as a citizen. We're talking about whether people feel like they have an opportunity that's equal to others, both in what they're able to do and what they actually produce as results. And it's very difficult to tell the difference between failure because the cards are stacked against you and failure because of something that you just have to take responsibility for. It starts to be a bit of a gray area. And then you start to get into things where, if you want to talk about equity, everyone has something that makes them marginalized in some way. Everyone has something that sets them at a disadvantage in some way. So if you're going to say that we have a duty in society to eliminate things that put people at a disadvantage in life, then to what degree does this apply? And the furthest path you could take in regards to this would lead you to the conclusion that all people should not be treated with equal liberty and equal rights, but all people should simply be ensured to have the identical outcome in life, which means you'd have absolute socialism, the complete equality of an end, that you would have no one who has more success than any other person, because we're not talking about giving people liberty, we're talking about spreading all things out so that it's totally equal in outcome, regardless of what an individual person does. Or maybe we're saying that we just do weigh things in sort of a fair balance, and we make good decisions to determine who deserves wealth to be spread to them and who deserves to keep it and who deserves to give it up and things like that. But then that leads to the problem of playing God, because many things wind up being shades of gray. Many things wind up being subjective. Maybe they're valid points, but everyone is going to see them in a somewhat different way. Justice is not always a completely clear affair. And what this bundling of issues does is it evades that fact. It eliminates the need to say that some things don't have completely clear answers. And each individual issue is separate from each other individual issue. We just have this attitude that you're either on board or you are part of the problem. And there is no opportunity to say, this is where I stand, and it's not 100% to the right, and it's not 100% to the left. Because if you don't get on board completely with the narrative of what people want you to believe, they're going to say that you are an enemy because you're not completely an ally. That's a very dangerous concept. It's a dangerous thing because people start to want to be able to play God, to say, this is where we stand, and you have to believe this, otherwise you're essentially evil. And that's bad if it's being done by religious people. It's bad if it's being done by progressives. There's no situation where it's okay or good to believe that you are in a position to be an absolute arbiter of truth. The spirit of liberty, as Justice Learned Hand said, is the spirit that is not entirely certain that it's right. So, as we look at issues that continue to pervade our society, now, first of all, what I would say is, I think that our society is in a better place in many ways than it has ever been in the past. Because if you look throughout history, there's been a lot of dark moments. And we've overcome a lot of those things. And we've advanced a lot of people's quality of life, a lot of people's liberties. We've made better the lives of many people around the world. And I think we continue overall to go in that direction, which is a positive thing. However, sometimes when things go well, we can take them too far too. And a good example of this would be if you're living in total poverty situation and you're struggling every single day to figure out where your next meal is going to come from, then your family is going to probably be reasonably united. You're not going to be complaining about too much because the problems are so great. You don't have time to think about who's going to control the remote control on the television. You don't have time to complain about what your favorite restaurant is or whether the server treated you exactly the way you wanted to be treated. You're not going to have time to be angry about all of these little things that you'd potentially get angry about in life, because you're fighting for your very survival. And when you're fighting for survival, then all of those petty things go away. And it's the same thing in our society. The more we have general quality of life, we're able to go sit at our computers and play video games and enjoy our warm houses and our air conditioning and not be hungry most of the time. The more we feel like we have time to busy ourselves with other things that don't necessarily need to be matters of our concern, but we make them matters of our concern, and then we elevate them to ridiculously high levels of importance. And after a while, we start to make out as if these issues are all encompassing, all defining. And if anyone doesn't come to agreement with us on the key issues that matter to us, then they need to be anathema. They need to be written off and disowned and, treated like the evil they are, and that's kind of how it is. But a lot of our division in society is not because things are bad. It's because they're actually quite good for the greater part. We are blessed enough to not need to worry about very much. And so we make mountains out of molehills. And it's important to remember that. But while we are addressing these things and thinking about these things, it's also important to remember that extremism can manifest on both sides of the aisle. You know, I think we talk about things like women's rights, and then we talk about things like gay rights, and then we talk about trans rights, and then we start talking about things like whether children should have gender altering surgeries. You see, that's where I'm going with things like bundling of issues. Think about how when you talk about whether people should have the liberty to vote, whether women should be allowed to drive a car, whether people should be held in chains of slavery, and then you take that a few steps further on down the road, and then you start saying that if a parent doesn't want to question the gender of their child and perhaps allow that minor child to change their gender through some sort of surgery, then that's a form of hate. You see, that's where we're bundling things together. So it's not about the truth anymore. It's about saying, because you support one thing, you therefore must support all things. So if you don't believe that it's totally normal for somebody to want to switch their genders around, then you automatically must be against gay people. You must hate gay people. You must believe that they should not have liberty or should not have rights. Well, no. You see, because I'm not even talking about a person having the liberty to change their gender. Now, if you choose to do that and you have the money to have that surgery, and that's something you really want to do, and you are an adult with the means to do it and to give consent, then that's your business. Now, whether I think that that's normal or if I perceive that as weird is totally in my realm of personal affairs. But to say that that issue has to be lumped together with other issues like whether gay people should have rights in society, well, they're not the same issue. You might subjectively think that they're similar issues, but they're not the same issue. You see, and so that's where we keep on taking things and then we add more things onto it. See, like, what comes next? Are we going to say that what if somebody wants to identify as a handicapped person and gouge their eyes out so they can be blind, or cut an arm off so that they can be disabled because they identify that way? Or what if somebody says that they identify as a dog? Then do we have to come up with tax dollars to fund them to have a tail surgically added on and maybe some dog ears and a nose or something? Like, where do you draw the line? Because the messaging that's out and about today is that you can't criticize anyone. You can't say that people are weird. You can't say that a certain desire is an aberration. You can't say that anything is unusual. You can't criticize anything, because any form of not endorsing something that someone says or does is a form of hate. Except for the fact it's not. The truth is, you can respect people's liberties and not endorse their actions. You can represent equality of opportunity without enforcing equity of outcome. You can respect the valid points that people have to make while not completely endorsing everything that they stand for, and not agreeing with someone does not automatically mean that you hate them or that you intend to eliminate their liberty. It's important for us to be able to make a distinction between all the different issues that are thrust upon us, to make up our own minds and understand that the position we reach on all the issues may ultimately not be in alignment purely with the left or the right. For example, I appreciate religious traditions, and I value the things that can be taught and learned from the Bible. And yet, I'm not a religious person. And I understand that the devout will have a problem with this. But from my perspective, I see good in faith and good in the teachings of Scripture. But I also don't see them as being the absolute arbiters of truth. I choose to make up my own mind. And where I see beauty and where I see truth, I embrace that. But that doesn't mean that I am 100% a tribalist that's going to say that one particular way of believing is the absolute truth. And that's, you know, we see it in gaming. We see people who want to say, well, what's the best game out there, you know? And then they pick one and they go to bat for it. Except for the fact you can't really pick which one is best, because they all have something good about them. And they all have something that's maybe a bit less good. And if you really want to have fun, on one hand, you're going to probably have to commit to something, because you can't be just all over the board, dabbling in every single thing that comes along without ever committing to one. You have to be present in something, but at the same time, you don't need to be so obsessed with one thing that you think that everything else is immaterial and there's nothing interesting about anything other than that one, you know, one game that you decided you wanted to play. And, you know, that leads me to one other final point, I guess, and that is the difference between fantasy and reality. And fantasy is an amazing tool for thought exercise. We can explore abstract ideas through the medium of fantasy. Stories can be a way to explore real issues. And yet fantasy acknowledges that it's a fiction. It's not real in the sense of being absolute in any one particular way. It's open to interpretation. So perhaps I'm a fan of Elder Scrolls lore because I like that game. But that doesn't mean that I am an exclusive worshiper of the 9 divines, the pantheon of deities in the game. I can appreciate the mythology of the story without it being a religious activity. But when we start to identify by a specific religious or political alignment in real life, we generally get the benefit of the mythology. We get the benefit of something that gives us a sense of context, a sense of understanding of our place in life. We get something positive out of it. But we go wrong because we have a tendency to overestimate how important our position is. It's basically fantasy, but without the liberty of knowing that it's fake. We think it's real. And then we get ourselves into trouble because things that should just be guideposts, things to think about, but not things to divide us, become reasons for us to essentially armor up and go to war against one another. And the truth is, we don't even need to do that, because for most of us, the things that really matter in our lives, the things that really matter between us and our neighbors, are quite simple. They're not the issues that are being blasted all over YouTube and all over your social media profile and all over the news. The simple things that matter in our lives are usually not the big ticket issues that are on everyone's mind all the time. The really contentious things. They're simple. You could probably take people who are of all different political and religious doctrines and stick them on a deserted desert island and let them figure it out all by themselves. And if they could find the resources they needed to survive, they would probably wind up getting along just fine, because they would ultimately realize that all the things that divided them were less than the things that unite them. They would choose to lay aside their small differences so that they could focus on things of greater importance, like surviving the day and building a community together. These are things that we can do, regardless of our alignment on the issues of the day. Maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. It's that in so many different ways, there are opportunities surrounding us to be pessimistic, to be hostile toward our neighbors, to be angry about political issues that either don't concern us or barely concern us. And really, we should just let a lot of those things go. And that doesn't mean we don't think about them. Doesn't mean that we're oblivious to the issues of the day entirely. Doesn't mean we have absolutely no opinions. It's just we can allow those opinions to be rather light-handed. And the things that we make more importance, more time in our mind for, can be the things that are more simple and universally applicable in our lives. Like how we spend our time, and whether we spend it in a way that is positive and inspiring or negative toward other people. There's a lot of simple things we can do to make our lives better, whether it's how we eat or how we exercise or getting enough sleep or whatever it might be. Focusing less on drama and more on doing your job at work, or maybe taking time to do something that you enjoy instead of being defined by something that ultimately actually detracts from your sense of peace of mind in life. There's a lot to be said and a lot to be thought about. But as with all things in life, the secret to success quite often is not about finding the right answer for everything. It's about letting a lot of those things go and realizing that we don't have to have an answer for everything. We don't have to have our 2 cents to throw in to all the issues. It's okay to just take a middle ground approach, to be satisfied with the place where you are, and to not see everything as a crusade that needs to be fought. So, let us all try to be at peace with one another and at peace with ourselves. Perhaps one way to begin is to realize that we don't have to force ourselves to be at peace. We can be perhaps at odds, and that's okay. It's okay to be at odds. It's okay to have differences. It's okay to have things we don't agree on. And in life, I think it's possible to have conflicts. It's possible to have things we disagree on. And those things don't have to mean that there's a problem. Sometimes that's just how it is, you know? Sometimes we just don't see eye to eye on things. You just let that be. It's hard to realize that. It's hard to realize that you don't have to, you know, figure out that perfect answer. You don't have to figure out where you need to stand on every issue. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just say, you know, there's truth in all things, but not absolute truth in any one of them. In any case, they are things to think about. Best wishes to you on your journey. And till next time, thank you for watching.